On the show today, we get a chance to sit down and talk with Julia Freeland, founder of RevolveYOU. We met with Julia at Impact Hub in Seattle to hear her story and discuss what it takes to restart your work life after an extended time off. This is The Career Queue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
It's great to have you here today, Julie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Stacey.
Yeah. I'm really excited about this conversation because the work that you're doing is has such an incredible impact, not only on the individuals, but also the larger community as a whole, right? So let's actually, before we get into RevolveYOU, which is the company that is near and dear to your heart, let's actually talk about your professional story and how you got to where you are today.
Well, first of all, my business is about helping people become who they're meant to be. And for me, that didn't come until I was about 45 years old. So last January, see, I just told you how old I am. Last January, I had a huge epiphany. And really, everything kind of came together in my world. Like there was this honestly, like a moment that I just thought, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be helping parents rediscover who they are, reinvent their identities, and relaunch their careers. And the reason I'm able to do that is because of who I am and all the experiences I've had as a result. So my professional story is varied. I have a lot of different careers that I've held. And I play in both the creative and the analytical side of things. And my beginnings, I'd say, like I've always had a fascination with careers. I never understood when I was in high school career education class and they're saying like, oh, would you like to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a ballerina? You know, those are your choices. That's all you get.
Right.
I thought something's wrong with this. You know, that can't be the only options out there. So like many people, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what in the world I wanted to do. And I kind of rolled from one thing to another. I started off, I actually pursued engineering, and as an undergrad, my reasoning for that, sitting in a high school science class across from my best friend who told me that his his brother, I should say, was going to become a mechanical engineer. And he said, so I'm going to become a mechanical engineer. And I looked at my best friend and I'm like, well, I'm good at math and science just like you are, so I'm going to become a mechanical engineer. And that's how I became a mechanical engineer.
You still friends with this guy?
Yeah, I am. And he actually is an engineer still. But for me, I had this dream of building the first neighborhood in space. I think it's interesting because I look now and I'm like, well, maybe I'm building the first neighborhood in space, but just a different kind of space and a different kind of neighborhood.
That's cool.
So I think it's fascinating to watch what happens with people as they kind of roll through their life trying to evolve into the next phase of their world. And so I shifted from engineering into litigation consulting because I right away thought, I was like, I like people too much. Like there's not enough people involved in this engineering thing. And then, that was an easy transition into that. And then the next transition was like, oh, actually, litigation consulting is not for me either. Maybe I'll go try manufacturing engineering. So I kind of bounced around. And then I went, actually, I'm going to go back and get my graduate degree in education and I'm going to become a teacher. And so it just kind of evolved from there. And eventually I got into organizational development and leadership development. And then I became a parent. And I was out of my career for 10 years. And getting back from that was a huge hurdle. It was it was like one of the biggest reinvention experiences I had had. And as you can tell from my very career, that reinvention was kind of this very natural thing for me. So I had a lot of confidence in my ability to do it, but I was really, really distraught actually by the attitudes that I encountered from career coaches, from employers, and from my fellow friends, both former employee or coworkers and also people that had known me as a parent. And all of the communication that I received was that I was going to have to start over, that I'd be lucky to earn half of what I had earned in the past, and that I'd be like basically competing with new college grads. And to me, that didn't work. I was like, that's not okay. So when a career coach once told me, hey, just put down one line in your resume explaining what you've been doing for 10 years, I wanted to reach across the table and like strangle him and go, can you describe one line, to use one line to describe 10 years of your life? Because I can't, not for me. That was kind of like this eye-opening experience there, but I was able, and at that point there, I was like, something's amiss here. We need to do something to help parents relaunch more successfully. I did end up getting the opportunity to relaunch my career, and I was lucky enough to land a position where I was involved in doing something I'm very good at, which is creating experiences to help people through change that resonate on a very emotional and personal level. But I did it at the corporate level for senior leaders at some of the biggest companies, in our country. And I got to see some pretty massive cultural change initiatives pushed through along diversity, inclusion, performance management, leadership development. And through that experience, I started having these aha moments of like, God, there's a lot of similarities between what a senior leader needs to be taught and what a parent naturally develops. Interesting. But so along with this, all these experiences I was getting from, learning that, the other thing that was happening is that I was so determined to show my self-worth, to prove my worth again, that I was extremely driven towards trying to get back to my old former position or title of being a director. I took on every job. I did everything perfectly. I basically, at the time I'd also gotten divorced. So I had these moments of time when I was completely by myself so I could throw myself into my work. So I was really driven on a mission to get back those 10 years that I had been out as far as career growth. But unfortunately in that drive, I kind of lost touch with my values. And I realized that I hadn't been as self-aware as I thought I had been. And I started having some issues where relationships I was engaging in, some with clients, some with, but mostly just with my own team, they weren't going as smoothly as I had thought or I had hoped. And what turned out was that a lot of the baggage that I had developed over being a full-time parent, when I'd been a full-time parent, I hadn't really processed that, what it had done to me emotionally and psychologically, and how I was going to bring that forward into this new role. And I hadn't really looked at the differences between these two identities that I was playing. So I experienced a lot of falling and tripping and eventually got to a point where I had just gotten done with one of the most successful projects I was on, and I got back to my company and they kind of said, Julia, the way you do things, it's antiquated and old and it's no longer valuable. And I thought, what do you mean? And so I started realizing my company was going through some change too. They were trying to adapt to a new way of doing things and adapt to this new world with it's got all these different kind of beliefs about what does work really mean and how do we approach a problem to get to the right answer and create innovation. And for me, making that shift was very difficult because it basically brought me back down to zero again. So where I had been feeling very good about who I was, like I had relaunched and I had gotten back to a position of leadership again, I clung so tightly onto that, I became very hard to shift and change. And I had a pretty rough 6 months after that. I actually got demoted. I had my staff taken away from me. I had my staff tell me that the way I was treating them was not respectful, and that they felt like I wasn't interested in their growth. All of that was extremely, big, huge humility pill, so to speak, as my friend mentioned, humble. And it was a huge shock to me that how hard, I fought this all the time. I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm great. I'm good. I know what's right. Look at what I can do. You have no idea what you're talking about. But every single time I fought, the more I fought, the harder they kind of said, Julia, you don't understand. Like you're not self-aware here. You don't understand how you're holding yourself back. So in the experience of having all this taken away from me, I started to have kind of these epiphanies and these eye-opening experiences of, oh, wow. So what's holding me back, it's not what I know. It's the fact that I'm holding too tightly onto what I know. And it's the fact that I haven't let go of this past identity and figured out like what's relevant moving forward. And I also haven't looked at what's happening in the world today and understood that the way I operated and thought and engaged with the world actually needs to shift to match this new digital generation that's coming up and the way they engage with the world. Because in order to be relevant, I need to operate in that world, not in the world that I used to know.
And do you feel like you had mentioned that you'd kind of swayed away from your values and that, but did it feel like you've had to kind of double down on proving that you were valuable in your work, and that's perhaps how you swayed away from that? Yeah. Because reentering the workforce after a significant amount of time off. Yeah. And it wasn't even time off. It's not like you were sitting around eating bonbons, right? Like,
I never say time off ever.
But you'd take a step. I jokingly refer to it as the hamster wheel, right? And because that wheel keeps moving and you have to make sure that you're moving with it. And sometimes when you step off it, you have to figure out how to get back on. And sometimes you fall trying to get back on.
Yes.
But that there's this perceived notion that you not only have to prove that you deserve the job, but that you should keep the job. So therefore, you're kind of like clearing the deck, right? And
well, even more than that, I mean, I was extremely confident walking back into interviewing. I had no problem there. It was the fact that I was so driven, that I was so heads down, that I had lost my own ability to see what was happening around me. And that's kind of really where the poison was. It was the fact that I had become so self-absorbed and centered about seeing myself succeed that I forgot that my value set was actually, I really like to see a whole lot of people succeed. Whereas as a parent, I was able to do that.
Right.
When I got back in and I felt like this societal judgment around who I was and my abilities and the doubt, and even how I had kind of come into this particular job. I mean, they had originally tried to put me into a much lower position, but I said, I am not interested in it. So they came back and I said, like, okay, I will take a couple steps down, but I'm not going to go down as far as you'd like me to go down. Cause I understand, like, I need to catch back up, but let's be truthful about this. Like, I have not lost my skill set. Right. I've not lost my drive or my ability. However, saying that, now I've got this, okay, I got to actually prove myself. And by the way, I actually really want to be up there. So I really got to prove myself. And that's really where I lost sight of my values. It was trying to recover from being in a role that was looked down upon by a lot of the world. And that's this interesting, juxtaposition with parents, right? When the world talks about parents, we talk about how, like, most important role in the world, raising our future, it's amazing. And then you go and you try to look for a job and people are like, well, what have you done? Put one line in to explain that 10 years. And, that's a problem there, right? So who's the problem? Who has the responsibility to explain that difference? Right. And the responsibility actually falls on the shoulders of the parent, of the person who's been there, because you can't change the mind of everybody without changing yourself first.
Right.
So really, I want to help parents change the way they view themselves. Because in this world, just like the world out there has been changing so much, the world of parenthood has changed a ton too. As women, we have our parents, we're about the same generation. It's like our parents, they might not have felt like they had, our moms may not have felt like they had the opportunities to go and be everything that they wanted to be, but they certainly told us that we did. And so we were brought up with this idea that you can go do and be anything you want. But an interesting thing happened when I pursued my career. As soon as I had become a mom, the expectations shifted and changed. And there's that traditional idea of what my role was had clicked into place. Like what was left over from generations had kind of started filling in the spots and saying, creating this new reality for me. Like, Julia, you're not going to be a good parent if you don't step off this and go be a parent. But that conflicted with my view of who I was and my desires of what I wanted to be. So you have a whole generation of women that are like having this tug of war between this identity, and they've been told they have to be one or the other.
Right.
And so now you see like relationships happen between women where they kind of conflict against each other and they judge each other for the choices that they made, which I think is awful, because really what we all want is we want the same thing.
Right.
We want the ability to have our families and experience what it is to be a really great mom. And so do dads too, for that matter. But we also want the experience to really grow and thrive and stretch our brains and be a part of something bigger. So how do we find that new place for ourselves? And a lot of that has to do with examining the judgments that we've placed on ourselves based on old beliefs, traditional ideas, and antiquated mindsets. So that's really where I help people kind of break that down.
Wow. Well, and that leads us into RevolveYOU. So you've segued beautifully into, ultimately, it was the personal journey that you took that led you to developing this incredible program, I guess, being called RevolveYOU. So we'll get into left versus right brain, because I think this is actually, I had mentioned before we started recording that this is incredibly relatable. On your website, you have that left versus right brain conversation, right? So I definitely want to get into that, because it goes back to what you just mentioned about this tug of war with yourself. But let's talk about RevolveYOU and the services that you're providing to your community ultimately, right? For anyone living in the Pacific Northwest, what an incredible opportunity to be able to work with someone like you that has true passion around this, not only because it is a part of your driving force as an individual, but it goes back to, again, your values of wanting to help other people be the best that they can be. So RevolveYOU, tell us all about it. Tell us what it involves and who your target audience is.
Yeah, so my target audience at this particular point in time is really full-time parents who have been taken a step away from their career for a while. And I mean, and that while might be that they went and worked part-time for a while. It might be that they went and did contract work or project work for a while, and they're really interested in kind of figuring out what's next. Or it might be that they took like 5, 10, 15, 20 years off, and they're saying, you know what? My time with these kids it's coming to a close, and I'm at a place where I need to know what's next. Or maybe they're at a place where, you know, my kids don't need me as much anymore, and I really am feeling this calling to get back to something else. And honestly, where I get a lot of my clients, the space that they're in, their headspace that they're in, is that I have no idea what I want to do anymore. Because I've spent so much time thinking about others, thinking about my family and my spouse, that I literally have no concept of who I am anymore. And I personally went through that. I remember, I don't know, maybe I'd been a full-time parent for about 8 years. I remember a friend saying, Julie, what do you dream for yourself? And I just paused and I started crying because I had nothing. I couldn't think of anything. And as I mentioned to you before, I used to be a huge dreamer. I mean, I dreamed of building a neighborhood in space, right? So for me to be in a place where I had spent so little time thinking about who I was and what I wanted for myself, that was a pretty poignant spot to be in. But I realized something's got to change. So RevolveYOU came about through, all this experience. And originally I actually wanted to start the company in 2014 when I was I was like in that first phase of like helping people try to look at relaunching themselves. And at that point, I thought that relaunching post being a parent was all about just coming up to speed with job search skills and coming up to speed with technical aptitude. It wasn't until I had been through the experience myself till I realized, oh, wow, there's something way bigger. So now my goal is really in helping people become who they were meant to be through rediscovering themselves, reinventing their identity, and relaunching their career. Because my goal is not to just help people relaunch their careers. My goal is to help people create lives and paths forward for themselves by really understanding who they are and creating a life that's in line with their values and also is in line with what's happening out in the world today, so that they are not only valuable, but they're also relevant going forward. I want people to be successful in every endeavor they do, in the relationships and engagements they do, going on a forward basis, not just today. It's not about just getting a job today. So I believe very strongly in the idea of evolution. And I believe that as we go through life in the different phases of our life, we evolve over and over again. So we revolve. And that revolution requires us to look very closely at who we are today and compare it to who we used to be and think about where we want to go. Who's the new person we want to be? And it also requires us to look very closely at our place in life and our purpose in life and making sure we check in to see, are we creating the value that we want to create? And are we still relevant in our world or in that future world? So what I do is I help parents go through those 3 different phases. And I try to inspire people through the writing that I do. So on a more global basis, like I do write a lot. I am working on kind of creating a virtual online training piece of it, which will eventually get launched out. But right now I focus very closely on creating cohorts that are tight-knit groups that support each other through this very deep dive into understanding who they are, reinventing themselves, and kind of charting a path forward.
That's great. And I'm sure you have seen incredible transformations through this experience.
So inspiring.
I was going to say, I mean, that's kind of one of the great benefits, right? Is that you're able to witness these revolutions that are happening for each individual. And because I would imagine that no two are alike.
No.
Right.
The interesting thing about it is it is shockingly hard to convince somebody to go through this journey. Because it's scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I'm talking about making massive change in every aspect of your life.
Yep.
And so what we teach, or what I teach, it touches on every aspect of your life. And so when people get in, they just kind of have these like huge aha moments of, oh my gosh, that affects my marriage, that affects my children, that affects my work outlook. Oh. So it's super fun to see people have these massive just shifts in the way they think.
Yeah.
And these, and it just they light up with the idea of, oh my God, the world is so amazing. It's so much different than I thought it was.
And it's bigger.
So, so it's like getting away from that narrow focus of like heads down into just your everyday kind of thing, and really creating this consciousness of a much bigger picture.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I had mentioned earlier the left brain, right brain. So, and this is a part of your writing, right?
Yeah.
I've had the fortune of being able to take some time and be able to go through all the great learnings that you share and all of the great questions that you put out there for people to consider too. So, but one of the things that really kind of hit home for me was just the left versus right brain thought process. And so let's just leave it at that, left versus right. Can you share with our listeners, from your point of view, what that looks like?
If you've read any Dan Pink, Whole New Mind, and it's this idea that in the past, what was truly valuable was our ability to know information. And today, going forward, your ability to know information or know a specific skill, it limits you. It doesn't make you truly valuable. What makes you truly valuable is your ability to combine and connect and create new. So whereas I was formerly trained as an engineer, so I approach everything I do with a certain analytical, it taught me how to think. So I have a very analytical side of me that is, research-based and data-based, and I can nerd out hugely. But I also have this very social side of me and a creative side of me, and I don't know where that exactly got started. I mean, my mother was an artist. My sisters were artists and singers. I was the engineer. It was weird. But my dad was a doctor, so maybe that's how it came. So, but I grew up in a family where I think the belief that you could do anything you set your mind to was really prevalent. And so as a result, I have this attitude, not only about myself, but about everybody. So everyone I engage with, I'm like, there's nothing you can't do. All you have to do is put your mind to it and you will get there. It just takes effort. And it takes this belief in yourself but being able to dance on both sides, both the left and the right, is where you can become truly valuable. And it's what we need, because our new world, it requires a bunch of entrepreneurs. We're not about, if you track to a position or a role where you're just doing one skill, and that's great, develop that skill, but I would encourage you to jump then to the next one and continue to jump. Because if you don't jump, eventually something else, and I say something else, will come over and take over that particular job.
Yeah.
So we need to tap back into our ability to be human, not to be machines. Mm. So as machines start evolving more and they get better and better, our ability, our gift is our ability to think creatively and empathetically, and to combine different ideas that are disparate. So for me, whenever I'm talking to somebody about their career, I'm like, what do you love to do? Because take that and then take some skill that you have and combine those two together and create a job for yourself. Mm-hmm. Because that thing that they taught you in career, class, engineer, doctor, lawyer, ballerina, fireman, whatever it is, that's old world. That's the old way of doing things. So if you walk into a career coach and they start saying like, okay, what do you want to be? A project manager, a developer, or a marketing agent.
Right.
Walk away. Yeah. I'm sorry. In my opinion, walk away. Because that's not opening the doors to you. That's limiting your perspective. Right. So for me, the left and the right brain is just this idea of really creating a new reality for yourself.
I love that. It's the 1 + 1 = you. I was listening to a podcast from recently featuring Damon John, one of the Shark Tank guys, founder of Fubu. He was saying that he didn't know it at the time, but ultimately he was developing what is known today as the ability for people to actually go out and create their own job descriptions. And so he took his love of fashion and hip hop and made a hip hop clothing brand. Exactly. And this is something that he was doing in the 80s. And it seems to be a lot more socially acceptable to do something like that now, right? More people are getting the courage to be like, wait a second.
It's getting there.
There's still
a lot of fear around it.
Baby steps. But a lot of that comes from the fact that he had the courage to go out and do that himself while he talks about friends driving past while he was selling, his knit caps, and they were laughing at him and stuff like that. And he's like, no one else was doing it around me. So I didn't have someone that I could look at and go, well, you've done it. Yeah. So he basically forged his own path. And that's part of the scary part too, right? Especially when you're taking 1 + 1 = you, is I'm looking at someone else going, I want to do exactly what you're doing, right? You've already channeled that path for me, and it's easy for me to just follow in your footsteps. Yeah. The hard part is actually going ahead and making that trail yourself. So I love that. Okay. So we're actually going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we're actually going to go back to talking about and I'm doing air quotes here, and folks won't see this, but the resume gap. So Julia's going to get into that with us when we get back.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
So welcome back. Today we're sitting down with Julia Freeland of RevolveYOU. So Julia, before the break, we were talking about your professional story, kind of a high level about RevolveYOU, and then the left versus right brain kind of approach to things. But let's actually talk about one of the things that I think is kind of tough to go into those conversations, especially when you're interviewing or looking for a job and re-entering the workforce, is this perceived notion of the resume gap. So is there such a thing as a resume gap?
No.
Okay.
Let's just be clear.
The short answer is no. All right. So when your clients are nervous about getting into that conversation on how they explain being out of the traditional workforce for a significant amount of time, or if they have been presented with perhaps someone that has voiced you have a gap in your resume. What is your kind of advice to folks on that?
Yeah. So I've written some stuff about this too, but in general, my advice for people is that if you know you're going to walk into an interview and and there's a bias that's going to naturally trigger about you, my recommendation is to face it right off the bat. Like, just get it out of the way. Because honestly, if somebody has a bias about you, what happens to their brain is it narrows down so tight down that it's very difficult for you to get anything really through there besides, wah, wah, wah. Mostly you have to figure out a way to like kind of get your foot in the door, like before it completely closes, and then pry it open. And the best way to do that, honestly, is to help people understand that they might have a bias against you, and then show them that bias is unfounded. When it comes to parents who have taken time away from their careers and they've got no employment on their particular resume to show for that time period, I tell them to go ahead and put in the time in the activities and the skills that they've developed right in to the middle of their resume, because it's not a gap. The job that parents do to take care of children, if you go and get employed, somebody else has to take care of those children. So you're paying somebody else to do that. You're paying somebody else to do the job that you do. So why don't we give credit to parents for doing a job? Because not only are they taking care of kids and the household and the budget and running a small business of the home, which, yes, you can argue that parents that are going to their careers also do parts of that. But there's a whole chunk during the middle of the day that somebody else is doing that. Mm-hmm. And so not only is there that, but there's also all of the different community involvement, the volunteer projects. I mean, the entire public school system runs effectively because of full-time parents that do a whole heck of a lot for all the children in the school, not just for their children. So write that down. And then think about all of the volunteer guilds, the guilds that you're a part of, or the foundations, the boards you serve on. All of those volunteer things are active. They're jobs that you do. So talk about them. The challenge you have, though, is that you have to be able to translate the value of that work so that the person you're talking to can understand it. So if you walk in saying, hey, I was the coach for my kids' soccer team, or I ran the after-school activity program for my child, that's another confirmation. That's another bias right there, right? You just shut me down. Like, it had to do with kids. It had to do with school. I'm out. That's no relevance whatsoever. However, if you shift that and change that and say, I strategically planned how to get, a team of 12 through an entire curriculum based on, these particular leadership standards or these particular team standards. Now you're talking a language I get, I understand. And now I can see how there's some relevance there. So that's really what I work a lot with my parents on, is let's help you shift your language so that you can talk it in a language that the people you're interviewing understands.
Yeah. So it's those transferable skills and translation.
Yes.
So transfer and translation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I truly look at, I see huge business value and business development value, actually, in the time we spend as parents. And I also see it just like any other job. There are some skills that you develop in that role that are truly transferable, and there's some skills that are not.
Right.
But that's no different than any other industry shift. Truly. Like, if you're shifting from being a part of the entertainment industry and you're going into the finance industry, there's translatable stuff and there's not translatable stuff. If you're shifting from the athletics industry into the marketing agency, same thing.
Yep.
And it's this ability, that right brain, left thing, it's our ability to be critically analytical about what it is that we've done, along with creativity to be able to translate what those are, that really creates and crafts a path to helping other people understand what it is that you're good at.
That's great. And that hard first step has got to be convincing yourself that you're worthy of that too.
Exactly.
Okay, I love it. I love it all. Okay. So let's actually segue into how you help your clients with this. So you have actually something called PrEP.
Yeah.
PrEP workshops.
Yep.
Yeah.
Parent Revolution Program.
Awesome. Okay. So while currently available in the Pacific Northwest for your local clients, would love to be able to share this with our broader audience, just simply perhaps to plant the seed to start thinking about these kinds of things. And obviously for in the future, once it's available beyond the Pacific Northwest, that you can maybe add additional clients from around the country and around the world. But for those folks listening today, let's talk about the PrEP workshops, but then also just some of the things that folks can actually maybe DIY to start thinking about.
Yeah. So getting back to what we were talking about with evolution and this idea of revolving. In order to successfully revolve, you really need to look deeply at who you are, and you need to look at the value that you provide and your place in the world. And so what I do through PrEP is I help parents dive deep into who they are, really understand what makes them who they are. Because as far as, do-it-yourself type stuff, if you need to know very deeply about what you're good at and who you are and what kind of value you can provide in order to be able to sell yourself to somebody else in an interview. And if you can't answer that question, this is one of the things that I feel is so ironic. Oftentimes, I'll meet with somebody initially and they're like, so can you tell me what I do? I'm like, I can't. So I'm kind of interested in this job and this job and in this job. And I'm like, well, why? So those are the things that I challenge people. I'm like, know who you are, know why you do things. Simon Sinek, start with why. It applies here too. Know why you do things. And if you know why you do things, you will be so much more valuable and ready to engage in a tough interview session, because you know what you stand on, what the foundation is you stand on, and you know the value you bring to people. So in the Parent Revolution program, I have like 3-4 week workshops that we go through. And I'm actually working on a book right now to get out there to talk about this process of reinvention that I take people through. It follows the hero's journey. And it's this idea that we need to depart from what we know. We need to engage in an adventure to learn new things. And then we need to return to the world as we know it, but now with a new perspective, and understand how that shifts every aspect of us as a result.
Great. So, and just witnessing the first day that people come in to that workshop and who they are and who they become at the end must be, you used the word inspiring earlier. Like it's got to be, because I would imagine that these incremental changes over time, you may not notice them on a daily basis, or the person, as an individual, but at the end of it, looking back during that time, like the journey must be just incredibly transformational. Yeah. Well, look at you.
No,
look at you. That's great. So let's actually talk about some 3 tips that people can take with them today, and whether it be, at a coffee break or sitting down having a glass of wine with girlfriends, let's start giving folks some things that they can start working on today. Yeah.
In general, I would say 3 kind of top things that kind of encompass almost every piece of advice I would give, which is 1, believe in yourself. 2, be curious. And 3, be brave.
Okay.
And with the believe in yourself part, this is so hard when you're going through reinvention, especially if you're starting from kind of behind the 8 ball. If you're, Brené Brown face down in the arena, which I actually think is one of the most beautiful places to be, because there's nowhere else but up. And when you're face down in the arena, the one thing you still have is you. You're always going to have you. So you need to believe in yourself. And if you can't believe in yourself, then go find somebody who will. Somebody like me, some really great transition coaches or life coaches out there, because that can be so helpful, because sometimes when we can't believe in ourselves, we need somebody to help believe in us for us until we're able to do it again. And if you can't believe in yourself, please, or if you don't believe in yourself right now, please do not start interviewing. Don't go out there. You're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. Because if you can't buy into who you are, nobody else is going to buy into who you are either. So give yourself the permission to slow down in order to speed up. And then along the be curious part, One of the most amazing things you can do for yourself to like open up your eyes and make yourself feel good about who you are is learn something new. Break the patterns, your normal patterns. Like if you normally go with your girlfriends after tennis to like go hang out and have a glass of wine, don't do that. Instead, ask one of them to go on a walk and maybe challenge each other to write a book or to read a book. Or if you're with your girls like doing wine and you typically talk about like what happened, you know, during the tennis match and all the bickering that happened because somebody picked somebody else or whatever it might be. Like instead say, hey, introduce the idea that maybe you guys could watch a video together, a TED Talk. What's your favorite TED Talk? Change the conversation. Because you need to change the environment that you're in order to change who you are. Because you need that reinforcement around you. And the be brave part is get out of your comfort zone. And trust that if you fall, you can stand back up. Try something new. Because that's the best way. That one step in front of the other is the best way you're going to get down to a new path outside of who you have been. Because if you don't like where you are today, you got to be brave to break out of that. So.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Interview done. Like, I love this. I love this. Well, actually, the interview, I want to continue this conversation, Julia. So I'd love for us to be able to pick this up because I think it's important because it's a conversation that evolves, especially because that reinvention piece, it ultimately happens to us every single day because there are these little life experiences that happen, but perhaps we're not overly aware of them, right? Because there is so much going on, right? And so much being thrown at us on a daily basis. But to be able to, like you said, give yourself permission, right? And that's one of the hardest pieces is to be able to give yourself permission. So Julia gives you the permission.
I give you permission. If that means anything.
No, but I think that's important actually because I actually have a girlfriend that I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, and she's in healthcare, and she said that she had a client come in, and it turns out that he needed another area of his life to be addressed by another healthcare professional, but he had so much going on in his life that she was able to address what was going wrong with him that, you know, based on her specialty or her expertise. But all she said to him is, you know, it's okay for you to go to them and seek help.
Yeah.
And he paused and he was like, what? And she said, I feel like you're looking for someone to give you permission to go. And he said, then I'm going to go. And I just think that's amazing, right? Because I think intellectually knew what he needed to do, but it was someone else giving him the permission. It wasn't her job to give him the permission, but she could sense that he was looking for someone to tell him it was okay to go ahead and do that, and he did. So anyway, I love that. Okay, yeah. Julie gives you permission. That's great. So Julie, as we wrap up, we have a couple of quick questions that we ask each of our guests. Kind of fun, a little lighthearted, but I love the fact that we get just different answers from each of our guests. So, what was your first job, and what did you learn from that you still use today?
My first job was pulling weeds under the deck of my childhood home. I got paid 25 cents an hour. And the lesson I learned from that is that in order to create something beautiful, you got to get a little dirty. And sometimes you got to get on your knees.
I like that. No one wants to pull weeds, but you have to be able to pull the weeds to see the beautiful flowers and to plant something new.
Yeah.
I like that.
Climb through the spider webs.
I love that. Okay.
Get through all that before you can find beauty.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So what have you read, listened to, or watched recently that you'd recommend to our listeners?
This is a hard one because I've been reading a lot. I'm a huge fan of Audible. I need to be the spokesperson for them. I love Audible. I read so much now. But I would say two things. Business-wise, The End of Jobs by Taylor Pearson is really an incredible insight as to where our country and our community, our global community is going when it comes to jobs. Highly recommend the perspective. It's fascinating. It's very aligned with a lot of the work that I do also. Kind of future work. And I've also just recently finished reading out loud to my kids Harry Potter. It took 2 years to read the entire 7 books aloud. And they don't know it, but tomorrow morning we're leaving to go to Harry Potter World. I get to surprise them tonight.
Nice. Wow, that's great. Oh well, yeah. And just just the process of going through that journey together.
It was.
Right?
It was such a great unifying thing to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll actually have links for each of those on the Career Queue. So, all right. So, last question: what would your 90-year-old self say to you today?
Keep going, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Have the confidence and trust. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much, Julia. And like I said, I actually want to continue with it. So, how can folks find more information about you and the great work that you're doing at RevolveYOU?
So you can find me on my website at revolveyou.com. You can find me on Facebook at RevolveYOU and also on Twitter.
And on LinkedIn as well?
And LinkedIn at RevolveYOU or also Julia Freeland. Actually, a lot of my posts right now are on LinkedIn because I don't particularly like the blog flow. I feel like LinkedIn organizes a little bit better, which is great, a great little plus for LinkedIn.
Well, we'll have a link to all of your all the ways to contact Julia at thecareerq.com. So
great,
thanks again, Julia. This has been great. Be sure to check out the show notes, where we'll have a lot more of the information that Julia has sent today, and obviously links to her website. And we look forward to revisiting with you soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com, where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media in the lovely Seattle, Washington.